are now listening to the War Report Podcast Network.
The Oklahoma Sooners are projected at 7.5 wins. That means Vegas is expecting them to have either 7 or 8 wins. We talked about it here on the Sooner Spotlight, and we believe that they should probably be at 8.5, where we expect maybe 8 or 9 wins. We have higher expectations, higher standards, of course, as Sooner fans. But the question arises, how would other SEC teams look in their projection if they were to have the same schedule as our Oklahoma Sooners? Let's talk about it here on the Sooner Spotlight. Sooner Nation, welcome into another episode of the Sooner Spotlight. I am your host, Josh Mahler. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at @RealJoshMahler. Check me out over there for all updates on this show and so much more. I try to keep engaged with everybody over there on social media. And just a reminder, this is still kind of a new production, so please help us out by hitting that subscribe button, hit that like button, and go ahead and comment down below as well. That helps us so much in the algorithms, helps us reach more Oklahoma fans like yourself. If you're not an Oklahoma fan, hey, you still came across a fun channel to check out. We're going to talk all things SEC. Today, we've got another SEC topic at hand. But just a quick reminder for those, we've had an amazing outreach from all of you guys as listeners and amazing growth so far. This thing has been taking off much more than I ever expected to. And so just want to let all of you know, if you've already hit that subscribe button, if you would just do one thing for us, and share this with a friend, one friend who would appreciate some Oklahoma Sooners content. If not, just go ahead and share it on social media. Let everybody see it. But today we're going to get into the Oklahoma Sooners and talk about not just our schedule, because we've already done that, but what would our SEC foes projection be if they were to have the same win projection as us? We had an amazing comment come through with the suggestion, and I loved it. It was a brilliant idea. It was from William Staggs 8741. He says, "It would be interesting to hear you comment on how you think other SEC schools would handle our schedule this year. Would Missouri's win total be 7.5 if they played our schedule? How about Tennessee? Texas is predicted to win 10, I think, but I don't see any way they would be predicted to win 10 if they played our schedule." Well, William, I totally agree with you, and it was an amazing comment and very good suggestion, so I appreciate that very much for putting that down there because I want to dive into this. This was extremely interesting, and so I went through and I started diving through each team's schedule and crunching a bunch, and you know what? I don't know exactly how Vegas makes their numbers or what algorithms they use, if I can say that word correctly, but I can take a stab in the dark and understand how other teams have performed, and I can take a look at all of this and kind of compare it to how Vegas has put odds out there in the past. Now I've crunched a bunch of numbers such as rankings, returning starters, even comparing other teams on each schedule in comparison with Oklahoma's, and kind of comparing all of that, pushing that all together to come up with my own predictions for each team. Of course, like I said, I believe that Oklahoma should be up at an 8.5. There's some other teams here that we're going to go through their projections and kind of talk about that as well, how I don't quite agree with Vegas and where they have it, but I'm not the one that makes the rules. I'm not the one that makes these numbers. But we are going to compare them with Oklahoma and put them to Oklahoma's roster, Oklahoma's schedule, if they were to have that schedule. So, this took a lot more time than I cared to admit, and I'm sure that nobody will overreact in the comments at all. Nobody's going to disagree in the comments. Everybody's just going to agree with me. No, obviously, I think all of this is going to be subjective, and I didn't feel like going through every SEC team, so I just went through just the SEC teams that are on our schedule, because overall, I think that's really what matters the most. So, if there's a team that you'd like to hear me compare, go ahead and drop that down in the comments. Feel free. But right now, let's go through each SEC team as we face them in the order of the schedule. And I'm not going to bore you with all that I put into for the thoughts and how I came up with these numbers, but I'm just going to give you a quick breakdown for each team. First, we're going to start with Tennessee. Tennessee is sitting at an 8.5 projection, win projection from Vegas. And overall, looking at them, so Tennessee, I think they're either going to be better than everyone expects this season, or they're going to be worse. Not really an in-between where they just kind of meet expectations. I think they're either going to exceed their expectations or fall short. And this is a Tennessee team that I think is very good. And obviously, we've talked about it, this Oklahoma game is going to be very crucial for both teams' success going forward. They right now, as their schedule stands, they have 4 ranked opponents and 6 that I would say are toss-up games total. And I think those 4 ranked go into that. Starting off with NC State, who is a ranked opponent. They have Oklahoma, a toss-up game with Florida because they're not ranked, but I think that they're going to be pretty good. Bama and Kentucky, another team that you don't want to take lightly, and Georgia. So those are their kind of overall toss-up games that I think they could win each and every one of these. They could possibly lose each and every one of these. I don't think that's the case, but going through with them, the way I'm doing this is I want to give them half the toss-ups. Because all of these, I think, are just kind of overall toss-up games. So if we give them half of their toss-up games, that gives them 9 wins. I believe that 8.5 is a pretty good mark on Vegas's behalf. So if we kind of take all of that into consideration, 8.5 seems like a pretty good overall mark for where Vegas put them. Jumping over with OU's schedule, they would have to face Oklahoma, obviously. And this would be at home now instead of being away because we're giving them Oklahoma's schedule. So that's at least a bright side for them. They would be at Auburn, Texas, at Ole Miss, at Mizzou, Bama, and at LSU. That's Oklahoma's schedule if you give it to Tennessee. So with that being said, I think Tennessee is a good enough team where I think I compare them to Oklahoma. I think both of them are kind of on the same level. They should be respected if you're going to play them. But who knows if they can reach that championship game or not. As it stands right now, I think Tennessee is a very respectable team overall. So when you look at them with Oklahoma's schedule, with all of those kind of toss-up games, like I said, with OU at Auburn, Texas, Ole Miss, at Mizzou, Bama, and at LSU. I'm going to be repeating those over and over again because that's Oklahoma's schedule. But I think honestly, with them being on the same level as Oklahoma, I'm kind of putting them at the same overall win projection that I would expect Oklahoma. Oklahoma is 7.5 on the books right now, but I give Oklahoma an 8.5. I'm going to put them in the same boat as Oklahoma and give Tennessee 8.5 as well. I think Tennessee's a very good team, and they could go over or under that 8.5. Let's jump to Auburn. Auburn to Vegas is sitting at 7.5, and Auburn is they really have one of the most manageable schedules that they have had in a very long time. And they really couldn't have asked for too much better of a schedule going into Hugh Freeze's second year. They do have Oklahoma, at Georgia, at Mizzou, at Kentucky, A&M at home, and then at Bama. So a pretty tough schedule, but manageable when you compare to some of the schedules that they've had in the past. And this is something, too, that I think Auburn is underrated. I think their current win projection should be at 8.5 as well. When I talk about that with Oklahoma, I think the same thing with Auburn. I think that over under should be at 8.5. I think they will be better than most are projecting them to be, and I think they're not given enough credit for what they have coming to their roster. When you talk about wide receiver talent, I think Peyton Thorne is going to be better. Their offensive line is a great offensive line. They have an amazing run game. But then you look at the defensive side of the ball, and it's still Auburn. They're still going to be very gritty over on the defensive side of the ball. So overall, I like this Auburn team. I'm gonna give them 8.5, although they're 7.5 on the books. Let's keep all of that in mind. But if they're given OU's schedule, I don't think they'd be given quite as much grace as what I'm giving them, or even maybe Vegas is giving them. And so I do think that OU and Auburn are really similar overall in total talent. I think they're both very talented programs. I think that Auburn is just barely on the heels of Oklahoma, basically where Oklahoma was last year. I think Auburn's stepping into that. And I think they're going to be a very good team going into this season, and just behind Oklahoma. Because of them being just barely behind OU, I think that they would be right around that 7.5 mark. If Vegas has them currently at 7.5, then I'm going to say Vegas would probably give them 6.5 over under on their win total. But I'm giving you what I think, not what Vegas thinks. I'm going to give them 7.5. So they are at 7.5. I think Vegas would mark them at 6.5. I would give them a 7.5, and I think that's reasonable, and I think that's what Auburn fans would really kind of expect from their team going into this season. So overall, they stayed about the same, whether you bring them from what Vegas has them on their schedule or what I would give them with our schedule. Going on to Texas, of course, we have that bye week, then go play Texas in Dallas. Texas is projected at 10.5 wins. That's pretty high for your first season in the SEC, but Texas has 3 toss-up games on their entire schedule that I give them. They've got Michigan, Oklahoma, and Georgia. Most would probably agree that we can mark Georgia as a loss on that schedule. I would say that you can mark Oklahoma as a loss on that schedule because I think we beat Texas. I'll talk about that more in depth as we get closer to that game. But, Texas does have a chance against Georgia if they're as good as they're advertised to be. So I'm going to mark that as a toss-up game when we talk about these projections because we haven't seen the final product on the field yet. We don't know what we're going to get. There are other games that I think would be expected to win that they could slip up in, maybe like a Florida, Kentucky, or Texas A&M. Texas A&M mainly because they're a rivalry, and so I think that that's one that, hey, they could slip up. I think they beat Florida and Kentucky and A&M. But outside of that, there's some games that, hey, they could slip up, no doubt about it. And Texas has been known to do that. Oklahoma's been known to do that as well. Just about every good team has those games where they slip up. Bama's done that in the past. LSU in the past. So definitely, when we look at their schedule, they have some games that they could slip up. But outside of these games, Texas really has an extremely manageable schedule. And when you compare Texas and what they have on their schedule, very easy when it comes to comparing to Oklahoma. Extremely manageable schedule, and really one of the easiest in the SEC, if not the easiest schedule in the SEC right now. And that's not to say that it's an easy schedule. I'm just saying the easiest comparably. So tough schedule because it's in the SEC, not nearly as tough as some like Florida or Oklahoma. And Sooner fans, get ready because you are going to see, especially from Texas fans, you're going to see a comparison on this first season in the SEC from Oklahoma to Texas. That let's say that Oklahoma wins 9 games and Texas wins 10. Texas is going to brag about it. Everyone else in the SEC is going to say, "Hey, Oklahoma, where were you at? You didn't even live up to the same hype." Even if Oklahoma wins 8 games, like I said before, we have to be content with that. Not happy about it. We can definitely want more, but eight games is kind of reasonable going into this schedule for Texas. Honestly, 9 games is like your floor for Texas's schedule. So you're going to see comparisons about Texas and Oklahoma in their record in the first season in the SEC, but just realize these schedules are not even close. Let's put Texas in our shoes. If they had our schedule, they would have 2 more top 25 games on their schedule. One of their top 25 matchups is A&M, so I don't even think I consider that. But they would have 3 more of their games would be top 15 matchups. So a much more difficult schedule. Plus you have games like Auburn that we're talking about. So let's dive into that real quick. So the games that would be kind of toss-ups for Texas if they had Oklahoma's schedule would be Tennessee, a top 15 team, at Auburn, not an easy matchup at all. Oklahoma, who's ranked number 16, so might as well be top 15. And then you've got Ole Miss, who's ranked number 6. You've got at Mizzou, ranked 11th. Bama at home, who's ranked 5th. And then you've got finishing off the season at LSU, ranked 13. So for Texas, looking through this schedule, obviously way more difficult than what they have on their schedule right now. Texas's current schedule has those 3 toss-ups that we talked about that we throw in there. But if they had OU's schedule, we're talking about 7 toss-ups. I mean, 7 of them, not just 3 that we're giving them right now. So, just give them half of the toss-ups, and we're sitting at 8.5 over-under for Texas. So instead of that 10.5, we're bumping them down to 8.5, which, to remind you, this is just exactly where I put Oklahoma at 8.5. So I'm saying Texas, Oklahoma, very comparable going into their first season in the SEC. If they were to have our schedule, I think they would have a very similar, if not the same, projection as Oklahoma. And I believe that the national narrative is that the SEC is getting Texas and OU is coming along. Us as Oklahoma fans understand that's the other way around. Just because Texas had this one good season and it was more recent than Oklahoma's good seasons, they're going to lean towards Texas and think that Texas is so much better when they're not. They're just as good, if that. And we as Oklahoma fans understand that they're not as good because they've only won 3 of the last 10 against Oklahoma. So we'll kind of throw all of that in there. But going on, leaving Texas behind as we usually do, even in the rankings and overall win totals. Let's go to South Carolina, our next SEC opponent, who would be at 5.5 right now on their regular win projections as Vegas gives it to them. And, reasonably so. South Carolina has 7 ranked opponents on their schedule as well, going into going on the road to Lexington to face Kentucky. And then they also, going through their schedule, they've got number 13 LSU, number 6 Ole Miss, number 5 Bama, number 16 OU, and number 20 A&M. They also have 11 Missouri and 14 Clemson. So very similar to what Oklahoma has, because we have LSU, Ole Miss, Bama, and Mizzou. So 4 similar opponents that South Carolina has. So very interesting when we look at that. And I think, honestly, all of those that they have on their schedule, I think South Carolina probably loses, except for A&M. I think that's one of those toss-up games. So, and I give them a toss-up for A&M, so and also Kentucky. So I think that 5.5 is a pretty good projection. I think that's a pretty similar what I would give South Carolina going into this season with what they've got on their schedule right now. With OU's schedule, it wouldn't be much different, but I would give them a loss at Auburn if they had to travel there. I'd give them, really, with Oklahoma's schedule, I'd give them 4 wins with really no real toss-ups on that schedule. And with that in mind, I think that I would give them a hook, which is that 0.5 that we talk about. So for those who aren't sure why we're talking about 0.5, it doesn't mean that they could get a half a win. It means as a projection where you could pick the over or under, and you would pick, so if I say Oklahoma is projected at 8.5, that means I expect them either 8 or 9, take your pick. You would take the over at 9 and under at 8. If you put it on an even number, which does happen sometimes, there's not always that hook. If you put it on an even number, you have a chance to break even, which is just boring. So let's put that out. I'm not giving any even numbers. We're going to put hooks on all of our projections. So with that being said, I'm going to bump them up and give that hook an upper edge. And so I think I would give South Carolina a 4.5 if they had our schedule, because I just think our schedule is just a little bit tougher. When you go to Auburn, I think if you just swap that at Auburn and Texas A&M, the game that they have, I think at Auburn is much more difficult than facing Texas A&M. So with that being said, 4.5 instead of 5.5 for South Carolina is what I would give them on that over/under win projection total. So looking at that, I think Oklahoma has a tougher schedule. That kind of comes into play. Going on to Alabama. Alabama's sitting at a 9.5. And I think looking through them, Bama currently has 4 ranked opponents, 3 in the top 15 in the AP poll. This is better than what Texas has on their schedule. And one of their non-conference opponents is in Wisconsin, which I think is being kind of not necessarily overlooked, but when it comes to the rankings, definitely overlooked. I think Wisconsin could be a very tough team, and who knows, maybe Wisconsin ends up upsetting Alabama in Madison. Who knows? But I do think that Wisconsin game would be one of those that I would put as a toss-up for Alabama on their schedule right now, since they're sitting there at a 9.5 over/under win total. A couple differences in their schedule is that they have Tennessee at Tennessee, so they would go to Knoxville. They also have Mizzou and Auburn at home. So those are the similarities with a little bit of a difference there on their schedule. I currently give them 7 toss-ups, which is exactly how many I would give Oklahoma, on Oklahoma's schedule. So if Alabama were to be on Oklahoma's schedule, I would give them 7 toss-ups. I think Alabama's also looking to be around that 8.5 mark if they were playing Oklahoma's schedule. I would put Alabama. I think Auburn and Missouri are a little more beatable when they come to your home turf. For Oklahoma, we go to Auburn and we go to Missouri, a little more difficult than if we were to host them. If they were coming to Norman, I would feel very confident that we would beat Missouri, and even more than I do right now. And I would feel a little more confident in Auburn, which means that I feel like, hey, we might be able to win by a touchdown or so. So definitely looking at that, I think they have a little bit of an easier schedule. So that's why I bumped them from 9.5 where they're at down to an 8.5, because I think Oklahoma's schedule is just a little bit harder when you take those comparisons. OU should really be just as regarded as Alabama right now where they're at, especially when you talk about with Texas and Bama. I think Texas and Bama, Oklahoma's on the same level as them right now. And I'm not talking about Bama with Saban. Bama with Saban, I probably give them a 10.5 with Oklahoma's schedule. That's just where they were with Saban. But with the question marks with Kalen DeBoer at the helm and much more around on that roster, I'm bumping Alabama down to 8.5 if they were to have Oklahoma's schedule. But let's go ahead and go on to Ole Miss at 9.5 right now is what Vegas has them projected at. So with 9.5, we have Ole Miss. They really come into the season with a schedule that has only 3 ranked opponents. 3 of them. They have at LSU, then they host Oklahoma and Georgia. Those are the 3 toughest games on their schedule. If we give them Oklahoma's schedule, I think we have the same toss-up games that I would give Oklahoma. So there's those 7 that I say are kind of toss-ups, 6 ranked opponents, and then Auburn. I would say the same with Ole Miss. And so I think I would have to take Ole Miss, who, again, I think is just as highly regarded as Oklahoma in my mind. I would take Ole Miss from that 9.5, and I would bump them down to an 8.5 win total projection. Honestly, I think with their current schedule, I would expect them to be more of a 10.5. If we're comparing to what Vegas has at 9.5, I would probably bump them up to a 10.5. So with Oklahoma's schedule, I would bump them from what I think should be a 10.5 on their schedule down to an 8.5. That's 2 less wins. Overall, I think Ole Miss, extremely easy schedule when you compare them to Oklahoma. But they do have some SEC opponents that are still no joke. Still have to take them seriously. Going over to Mizzou. Mizzou is sitting there at a 9.5 win projection. Mizzou only has 3 ranked opponents. This is the biggest reason why I think they're expected to win about 9 or 10. On their current schedule, I give them 4 toss-up games. I give them at A&M just because, who knows, A&M could be better than what I think they will be. I don't think they are as good as what maybe they're projected to be, but maybe A&M is a decent team and upsets Missouri. So they've got at A&M, and then they host Auburn, at Alabama, which I'm chalking up as a loss, and Oklahoma. I'm looking at that Auburn, Bama, and Oklahoma for Missouri, and I think they lose those 3 games, and again, giving them that toss-up to A&M. With OU's schedule, I think I give Missouri 5 wins with 7 quote-unquote toss-ups because they're projected to be really good this year. I've said this in the past. I don't think Missouri is that good. I don't think they're going to be as good as Oklahoma. I think they lose to Oklahoma. I'll go on the record saying that right now. So 5 wins is what I give them. I believe they would lose to Tennessee, Texas, at Ole Miss, Oklahoma, Bama, and at LSU if they had our schedule. They may have a chance against OU, Ole Miss, and Auburn. If I'm being generous, I will give Missouri their chance at that and say that those are some toss-up games for them. I have to go with my gut and say that if Mizzou was given Oklahoma's schedule, I honestly think their projection would be closer to 6.5. I don't think Missouri is that great of a team. I think they're a good team. I think they're a solid team, and I think Drinkowitz is building upon what he had last season, but I don't think they're as good as some of these other teams in the SEC, like Oklahoma or even Texas, Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, LSU. I don't think Mizzou deserves to be in the same boat as those teams. So I'm giving them a 6.5 if they have Oklahoma's schedule. I really don't have faith in Mizzou beating Auburn, Bama, and Oklahoma in this season. I think that 9 is kind of their ceiling this season, if I'm being totally honest. And that's just my opinion. Maybe they will prove me wrong. But let's go ahead and move on to LSU, who is the last one we're going to talk about here. LSU is another team that I think is very similar to OU in talent, but they do have a lot of new faces in that coaching staff and a lot to improve on what they had from their defense last year. And I don't think their offense is going to be as good this year. And if it wasn't for my faith in Brian Kelly as a head coach and what he's able to do, I don't think I give LSU enough as much credit as I do right now, and as I don't give them as much respect as I do right now if Brian Kelly wasn't their coach. I respect Brian Kelly. I think he's a great coach. I think he's going to do good things this year with LSU. They start off their schedule with number 23, USC, and hit the over on that, and you can thank me later. But they start off with USC, and that's in a neutral site, if memory serves me correctly. They have number 6, Ole Miss, number 20, A&M, who's ranked too high in my opinion, number 5, Bama, and number 16, Oklahoma on their schedule, as well as an unranked Florida, who I think is going to be much better than what their record may say. When you look at Florida, they are not what their record says they are. I think Florida, if they win 7 games this year, they have a very good season ahead of them if they win 7. They have a brutal schedule, worse than Oklahoma. Anyways, going back to LSU and what I think, I would say LSU should be at a 9.5 win total projection. So I think Vegas did a pretty good job. They put them at 9 even. I don't like sitting there at an even number. I'm going to give them that hook and put them at a 9.5. Again, with OU's schedule, I'm putting them in the same boat with the toss-up of 7 games. And I think I put them at that 8.5 over-under, just like what I believe Oklahoma should be at. LSU, a good team. I think they're going to make some improvements on defense. I don't think their offense is going to be as good. So they're going to be one of those teams that they're, again, much like what I said with Tennessee, I think LSU is just as good of a team as Oklahoma. But they're going to be one of those teams that either underperforms or overperforms. Absolutely. And that's kind of how I look at LSU. So again, LSU, I'm going to give them 8.5 if they were to have Oklahoma's schedule. Again, all of this is just kind of subjective. All of this is just kind of stuff that you throw out there, and you just make a bunch of random projections and say what you think would happen. And a lot of this doesn't matter at all, but it does go to say, with Oklahoma, we're projected at 7.5 wins. When we look at everyone else, like Missouri, who's projected at 9.5 wins, and even when we take teams like Ole Miss or Alabama or even Texas, who are better than us in their win projections, we look at that and say, hold on just a minute, we're just as good as them. So when we take all of that into consideration, at least this can make us feel better knowing that, hey, if they had our schedule, I think they would be in the same boat as us. And some of these teams, I don't think they would be in the same boat. I think they would be worse off than Oklahoma. So this just goes to show, in my opinion, I think Oklahoma deserves to be in the talk for SEC, overall for these big dogs. I'm not saying Oklahoma is going to come in and run the SEC. I think Oklahoma has a shot in the SEC. I think Oklahoma needs to be just as feared as the Texases, as the Alabamas, as the Ole Misses, as the LSUs. I think Oklahoma is in that same boat. I'll throw Tennessee in there as well. They're all very, very equal opponents, and that's why the SEC is so difficult, and I think it's even more difficult when you add Oklahoma and Texas into the SEC. Hey Sooner fans, did you enjoy this video? Well, go ahead and hit that like button and go ahead and hit that subscribe button. What are you doing if you've made it this far and haven't already? You should be able to find that subscribe button over here. And then if you want to see full episodes, we've got those up here and clips right down here. So go check that out. But we thank you all so much for all the love, all the support. We'll catch you next time. Boomer.